Can you tell people who you are? That's maybe the easiest.
Yeah, so as David said, my name's Ewan Gurr. Yeah, I've been in Dundee now for over 20 years. My mum and dad moved here from Edinburgh, so for my sins I'm a Hearts fan. But David and I became associated with each other around about 10 years ago through Dundee Evangelical Christian Alliance, which was a group of leaders and church individuals who were doing stuff in the city. And at the time I was leading what is now known as Dundee Food Bank, which operates in the centre of the city, provides food and support to over 12,000 people per year, and then moved on to work with the Trussell Trust to set up a network of food banks across Scotland. So that was really our association.
Yeah. And I mean, the Trussell Trust, you were the head of it for a while.
Yeah, in Scotland, yeah.
Now, it's interesting, I mean, we've all got certain things in common here. Actually, I hadn't realised this. Journalist, really. Because you're a journalist as well now, aren't you?
Columnist.
Okay, what's the difference?
Big difference. So I get to say what. Yeah, I'm a bit like Kevin in that sense. I get to say what I think, open my mouth and let my belly rumble about any subject.
Yeah.
Unlike Kevin, I get a complete free rein, so I can write about absolutely anything, and the editor loves it because I usually write about risky subjects, which obviously boost the figures. So probably the first risky subject I wrote about is why I think that David Robertson is a treasure to the city. And got lambasted for that one. Also wrote about the fact that I voted Leave and voted for independence. I was expecting to get a lot of hate mail for the...
Leave as in the Brexit referendum?
Yeah. So I believe in the notion of true independence, not this phony independence that others believe in. But anyway, I expected to get lambasted for that one. Got an 84-year-old man from Lochee phoning me up telling me he thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And then I wrote a piece last Monday about my opposition to the smacking ban, which was probably another risky subject. But yeah, I mean, the editor loves it for that reason.
Because you get the thing. I mean, another thing that I think we've all got in common, and, I do really, really feel this, is the effects of poverty, and like Lochee's book, Poverty Society, that people talk about poverty and yet don't really experience it or know where the effects are, and it's much more than just giving food banks. And you have been very, very involved in this. So you put out a series of tweets every now and then talking about the effects of poverty in the city. Do you want to just give us a couple examples of the reality of that? Because people say, poverty is all relative and all this, but you would argue that there's real poverty in Scotland and in this city as well.
So there's two things there. I mean, I'll come to the tweets in a moment. But I mean, poverty is multifaceted. Any of the literature you read on that is pretty open about the fact that there's different aspects of it. So I believe that there's the sort of institutional effects of poverty, which is political, which is economic, which is social, and which is material. So what you'll do is you'll get the people on the left saying, it's all the politics, it's all the decisions that are made at Westminster, or it's all the decisions that are made at Holyrood that create poverty. But then there's also the individual factors, which are physical, which are emotional, which are spiritual, and which are mental. So then you'll get the right-wingers saying, well, it's all about the individual, it's their fault, they're the ones that are at blame. And actually there's no one taking that kind of middle ground, that nuanced position that says, yes, there are institutional factors, but there's also individual factors. And so really what I do with the tweets is it's about highlighting the various different aspects of the ways in which poverty impacts on people. So I've had possibly the misfortune of meeting people, a middle-class mum who's had to give up breastfeeding after 6 weeks due to malnutrition. I had a young girl who was in her early 20s who refused sanitary items at the food bank that I ran in Dundee because she was so undernourished that she hadn't had a period for several months. I mean, this is a significant health issue, and it's about inequality. And there is aspects of that are about political decision making, but just to say it's politics that got us here is completely missing the boat. There are humans, there are individuals who are in circumstances that often are due to no fault of their own. They're born into communities that they didn't anticipate being born into. They're born into families that they had no choice over. And in an interview I did last week, I said that poverty is fundamentally about stripping choice away from people, and what we have as people of faith is the opportunity to give people not only their dignity back, but hope, a choice, an opportunity.
Yeah, because the important thing there, isn't it, that poverty is not about making people projects so that you can feel good because, I've helped the poor. Because everyone should have dignity as a human being, and that's, I've been looking at that with you. The malnourished thing, by the way, we used to do these things called discovery camps, and Webster Simpson, who died last year, ran these, and they were great. We took kids, from the schemes, basically. But one of the first ones that we did, one of the guys who's helped me was a doctor, and there was 2 wee boys who could run around like mad for 5 minutes, and then they were exhausted. And the doctor came to me and said, "David, these kids are malnourished."
Yeah.
He says they are severely malnourished.
Yeah.
And I thought, how can you be malnourished in modern Scotland, in a modern Western how can they be malnourished?
Yeah.
And yet that's not unusual, is it?
And I think that's what Loki's book really touches on. I mean, if any of you have not read Poverty Safari by Darren McGarvey, it is an absolute tour de force. It's only 130, 140 pages, but he talks about his situation growing up in Pollok. And I was just walking through Pollok the other day there, and again you see the transformation of this part of the city in Glasgow. But there's a young guy who grew up in very difficult circumstances, but also is very eloquent in actually communicating some of the difficulties that he faced. And he was always told, do you know what, it's the politics, it's the economics, that's what's at fault here. And he said actually there came a point where he said he had to take personal inventory about the ability that he had to change his own circumstances and the opportunities that were given to him, which enabled him to do that. Now he's an Orwell book prize winning author and is on his second book. So I think that there is that issue, but I do think that we've got to have this much more nuanced perspective if we're going to actually understand the reasons that people enter, experience, and then also exit poverty. Yeah,
and poverty is relational, it's spiritual, it's political, it's material. It's all these things. I mean, an old-fashioned thing about the dignity of work. But if there's no work, or if people, there's a whole range of different things. Can I ask you two guys, maybe start with you, Jim, what's your thoughts on what Ewan's been saying about poverty and what you've experienced?
Well, I was a scheme boy as well, and I mean, when I was brought up in Dundee and Kirchen, I suspect that probably about 60 or 70% of us were scheme folk. I mean, I sometimes hear the phrase bandied about now. People talk about social housing and the generation, and sometimes my own boys will talk about, council housing, not in a derogatory way, but in a way that kind of
it's them.
I almost kind of take a step back and think, well, your mum and dad we were schemies, as they call it. We were schemies. What I would say is I never felt any abject sense of poverty. My father was a French polisher. My mum was a dinner lady, stroke home help. He was never out of work until much later when his trade had pretty much died out. But I never felt any great sense of poverty. I never kind of felt that we had a great deal, but I never kind of felt the kind of crushing poverty I think that people have now. However, I think there was more of a sense of community. There was more of a sense of faith. I mean, people either, I'm saying my mum and dad didn't go, but we kind of all jettisoned up to St Columbus, and my mates who weren't Catholic were away down to the kirk with Jack Scroggie, down at the Mains Parish, or up at Downfield South or whatever. So there was a sense of community, there was a sense of probably faith as well. There was a sense of kind of people being bonded together, and people were working. There was work in the city. Perhaps wasn't always highly paid work, although many of the jobs were pretty well paid, in terms of people being semi-skilled and the NCRs and the Temixes and all the rest of it. The thing that struck me there, that Ewan said, that really hammers it home to me is we live in an age where people, and you've got to watch, you're not kind of only looking at social media here, but nuance is the word that escapes everyone, isn't it? Everything is either black or white. People take positions on everything. We live in an age of identity politics where nuance is, just kind of flies out the window. In a sense, we live in an age, I think, where open-mindedness and free thinking seems to have disappeared. I don't mean free thinking.
It's been closed, isn't it?
It's been closed down. That space has been closed down. So, I mean, and I'm the same. I mean, I cannot lie. I mean, I come from a traditional working class background, but live a pretty middle class lifestyle. However useful these terms are now, So I now wouldn't know poverty if it jumped out of my corn flakes packet. After 40 odd years at the coalface, if you want. But I hear tales, because Ewan will know that my youngest, who's now a cop, he volunteered in the food bank when he left school, and my wife followed him once he joined the police. He thought it would be a bit awkward if perhaps he was arresting people on the Friday night after he'd handed out a food parcel to them. I didn't understand that. But I mean, neither my wife nor Robbie talked much. And I respected that. It's always quite awkward when you're a journalist and your wife and your kids kind of are shy about what they say in front of you, even though you're a sports journalist. But I heard enough. I heard enough of the tales to kind of just horrify me. One of the tales that kind of horrified me was how many people actually in work simply can't make ends meet. Totally. Before you get to that base, people who have all sorts of personal issues, who have been born into circumstances that wouldn't have been of their choosing. Who've got addictions and all the rest of it. And we can all be hard, and I've done it myself. You can look and you can get angry, and you can think, why the heck can get a grip of yourself, man? And then you think, well, you know what, they're but for the grace of, go you or I. But my upbringing, was pretty happy. Was pretty happy, and I never ever felt disadvantaged. And it strikes me that now, in a time where we've got kind of more and more of plenty than we ever had before, you've now got kids who are severely disadvantaged and malnourished and all the rest. And there is that nuance. There is, to some extent it's the state's fault. To some extent it's parents' fault as well. And absent fathers, and is a thing that bugs me.
Yeah, it's in that sense it's just family breakdown and dysfunctionality. But Kevin, I've seen you rage against the machine on this, and rightly so. But I mean, do you have anything to add to that?
Hopefully. I was conscious that quite a lot of the time I was raging against poverty from a left-wing perspective, multi-deprivation, low mortality rate, or rather high mortality rates in the East End of Glasgow, where my family's all from, health inequality, medieval, not Victorian, medieval conditions. In a society which is one of the 5 richest in Europe, which is obscene. But I was also conscious of the fact that, like probably a lot of similarities with Jim, that my family had most of us basically moved away from our old sireland, if you like, and I really would have liked to have got into some opportunities to reconnect with what I was writing about, and I worked with I was asked to become a trustee of a charity in Glasgow, in the East End of Glasgow, that worked with very deprived children, and also I met Ewan a few years ago, who invited me. You invited me to the Parkhead Food Bank, didn't you? And I thought I really should go and spend the best part of a day there, because I was writing about food banks, and it's easy to write about something from statistics. So it was almost a kind of moral duty to actually encounter and experience to a certain extent what people were going through. And one of the things that I took away from that really shocked me was how quickly a person can slide into the depths of poverty from a relatively comfortable position in life, and that can happen through a wrong turning that the person can make, an error that is, and we'll all make errors, but some have their errors punished far more than us. So I accept up to a point that some people are the authors of their misfortune to a certain extent, but a lot of them have actually been punished to an extent that we can hardly even imagine for doing things that we've sometimes done. And we're talking about middle class people. We're talking about a father with 3 kids who's split up from his wife, who's still feeling traumatised about the marriage split, and loses his job because he's drinking too much, and he knows that in the next weekend he's got the 3 kids, but he's got no food to feed them, but he doesn't want to let the kids know that he's really, really poor. He's become really poor, and he's got a problem with drinking, and so he goes to a food bank. That is how quickly. So within a matter of 6 weeks, his life has gone from comfortable job, married, 3 kids, to relying on a food bank, fighting an alcohol addiction, and fighting for his kids.
Yeah.
And just to follow on from that, I mean, the day that Kevin came to Glasgow North East Food Bank, we sat with Alec.
Yes.
You remember?
Yeah.
And you know, for those of you that are on Twitter, what you were talking about, David, is the stories that I tweet every Saturday, which are called Stories Behind the Statistics. And this particular guy, he's one of those stories. Sometimes they don't want to necessarily have their name in a newspaper or their, and you can understand that. But Alec is one of these guys that you get the UK government at the moment that are talking a lot about, it's wonderful, unemployment is at its lowest rate since 1971. But the interesting thing about the UK government employment statistics is it's directly related to the claimant count, which is those who are in receipt of benefits. Now, Alec is one of these guys that has had such a traumatic experience of the social security system that he basically just signed off. This guy now doesn't show up in any unemployment statistics. He doesn't show up in any claimant statistics. This guy doesn't effectively exist because he gets nothing from the state. So this guy goes along to meetings in his local community where he knows there's going to be lunch or food put on just to survive. Will raid through dumpsters, lives essentially as a homeless guy. And this is actually the situation that we're in. There's even a guy, I don't know if any of you were at the Fairness Commission event that took place in Dundee a few months ago. There was a guy at the very outset of that, lives in the hill town, shared his story about the fact that he's gone off the grid. These people don't show up in any statistics. So the government thinks, great, they've gone on into employment, but actually there's a lot of people that are just disappearing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Now, I mean, you are a Christian, Ewan, and he sent me to preach good news to the poor. That was McShane's text when he was here, and this area, it's like yuppification is not new. This area was the poorest area. In fact, ironically, at one point in the 1830s, the poorest area in Europe was this area and a place in Manchester, somewhere Salford, I think. And the richest area in Europe was Broughty Ferry. They say, but things change and so on. But this idea of preaching good news to the poor, how does the gospel impact that? Because people say, oh yeah, we've got to help the poor, but what's all this Christian stuff? So briefly answer that.
Briefly, that's tricky. Well, in my column this week, just last Monday, I used this phrase, and I think Jim commented on that kind of weird position that Dundee's in, is that we're caught between austerity and prosperity at the moment.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of thing going on. I think what I loved about Awakening, the book that you wrote on McShane, is I'm sitting on the second row there. Yeah. You talked about how people used to have essentially their season tickets.
Yeah.
So when you had somebody that came up to you on a Sunday and says, that's my seat, it actually was their seat.
Yeah, they rented your seat. Yeah.
That's right. And I just found that absolutely bizarre. And yet McShane was one of the people that did away with that, so that people could sit wherever they liked. And I just loved that. Good news to the poor. I mean, the fantastic thing about the amazing thing about the scriptures is there's over 2,000 Old and New Testament scriptures that talk about reaching out to the poor, the needy, the widow, the orphan, the victims of injustice. It is, as far as I'm concerned, the most heavily emphasized message in the scripture, which means if we're not doing it, we're being disobedient. We're missing the whole point of what the church was set up to do. I mean, Dave, we often used to talk about education, healthcare and welfare. That was what the church did. We started it and we've given it away and we've totally blown it. So what do we do now? We sing songs on a Sunday and actually miss the stuff that we were called to do. And so I think we really need to, I think food banks in a way is a rediscovery of what it is to actually give your life and your energy to serving other people. That's what we were committed to do. And that's what Christ did. Yeah. He served people. And that's the good news, is that when you serve people, especially those who have lost the embers of hope of being completely snuffed out, when you can begin to stir those embers again and bring together a bit of that life, a bit of that hope, a bit of that the idea that there is an opportunity to change your circumstances, that, as far as I'm concerned, that's great news. That's not just good.
One of the things that's really interesting about this is, every now and again there's a collection in Tesco or Asda or whatever, and I know that when Irene and Robbie did it, the tale that always came back to me, and one of the jobs that I missed out, my mother was horrified, but I once went and drove a taxi for a year. And the one thing I always found out was that the biggest tips came from the schemes.
Yeah.
And Irene and Robbie would tell me that the poorest, pensioners and all the rest of it, were the most generous in going round to Tesco and the Asda, getting their own shopping and then buying, what they probably couldn't afford to put into a bag for those who were needy at the food bank.
Jim,
so very often the poorest in society are helping the poorest.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I did numerous collections with your son and your wife, and we used to just stand and look at a trolley full of food, from a wee old lady who says, listen, I've worked hard all my life, but, the fact is I'm feeling sustained, I'm well taken care of, the pension's coming through. And she would literally come up with a trolley full of food. Yeah. And you're just thinking, my goodness, I mean, that is just complete selfless generosity. And it's you're absolutely right. It often comes for the people that you would least expect it from. I remember several times there's people who have been beneficiaries of the food bank say, this is me giving back, this is me giving something back for the support and the help that you gave us. Yeah. It's an incredible thing.
And I think that for me, there's that. And then there's, my son's planting a church in Charleston and so on. And I think there's an attitude where we perceive charity, inverted commas, as, this is us helping them, which is crazy, because from a Christian perspective, what we're saying to people is, you're actually made in the image of God. You're valuable. Yeah. Not the kind of, you're a princess, and you know what I mean, but there's a dignity in being human. And one of the things I think the greatest poverty that gets taken away from people is the dignity of being human. Yeah. And to be treated like a project, to be treated like dirt. Yeah. Every human being, and it's the gospel. When we say to people, look, Jesus forgives sins, Jesus renews, Jesus, that's the great message that we have. But we need to combine it with action. We can't go around saying, Jesus does all this and we do nothing, because he tells us to do it as well, So that's what you're on about.